Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel. Peace is closer than ever, but at the same time further than ever. Let me explain why. Trump has accepted the terms of the deal proposed by Putin. These terms include the withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from the Donetsk region and a freeze along the line of contact in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. But now the question lies with Zelensky and Europe. Will they accept it or not? All they need to do is say yes, and then that's it. Within the next couple of weeks, the war would be over. But yesterday Zelensky spoke, Ursula von der Leyen also spoke, and it seemed like they don't want that. They want war. But today everything will be decided. Zelensky has arrived in Washington together with the Europeans. By the end of the day, or closer to night, we will already know whether the war will end in the coming weeks or not. Right now the fighting continues, and we continue to study the situation at the front. So friends, today there is no bad news from the front, only good news. Many are concerned about the Dobropillya sector. I hasten to reassure you, the Ukrainian armed forces have made no further advances there. Yesterday, I explained in detail that the Azov fighters, during counterattacks, managed to recapture the village of Vesele, the village of Zoloty Kolodiaz, and Kucherev Yar. And that's basically it. They took back about 20 square kilometers, while the Russian breakthrough covered about 180 square kilometers. So despite all these issues, the Russian side still holds a huge advantage. As for the past 24 hours, what happened here? First of all, footage of objective control came from Zoloty Kolodiaz. The 79th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces took the village under their control. But to be fair, in my reports I had not listed the village as under Russian control. American cartographers also did not mark Zoloty Kolodiaz as being under Russian control. They placed it in the grey zone. Now, however, the village has shifted from the grey zone into blue, meaning it is firmly marked as under Ukrainian control. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically Azov units, yesterday attempted to push on Novoishakovo. Ukrainian cartographers even mark the village as almost completely under Ukrainian control, but this is not true. The majority of Novoishakovo, as it was under Russian control, remains under Russian control. Yesterday, Ukrainian troops tried to rush in from the west on 3 buggies, but Russian drone operators destroyed them before they even reached the village. They never made it there, which is confirmed by video footage, so these are not just my words. I'll show you the footage of this strike. As I said, they didn't reach Novoishakovo, and thank God, otherwise it would have been very tough for the Russian guys. At the same time, the western part of the village is not controlled by the Russian side. Some Ukrainian soldiers managed to slip in 3 days ago and are hiding in the basements. The Russian army is now trying to root them out. Overall, if you've noticed, the so-called Peremoga Bean and victory has suddenly disappeared. Remember the excitement on the Ukrainian side 3 days ago? And now? Back then they were saying Azov had cut off a whole salient, and that it was a total collapse. And now, even Ukrainian media are silent. Or rather, not completely silent. They're starting to complain that the Russian army has brought in experienced drone operators, and now it's difficult for them. That is correct. I confirm it. I won't say from which direction the Russians redeployed drone operators, but yes, now there are skilled crews here, and Azov is taking heavy losses. So in 5 days, all they managed to do was trim off a small tip, and that's it. The rest remains firmly under Russian control. That's how things look for now in the Dobropillya direction. Let's move further. If we sum up the overall situation at Dobropillya, the front here has shifted into more of a positional war. The Russian army has brought in drone operators, reinforced their presence with significant forces, and as a result, neither side is advancing much at the moment. The Russian army cannot expand the zone of control because Ukraine has reinforced the flanks, and these positions must be held to avoid a painful counterattack, which really could cut off the entire salient. The Ukrainian armed forces, in turn, are trying to advance, but so far without success. While they were redeploying Azov units and bringing in reserves, Russian troops had time to dig in. Plus, as I mentioned, they brought in experienced UAV crews who now monitor all approaches and destroy both Azov fighters and Ukrainian reserves being moved into the area. So for now, everything is at a standstill. Perhaps at some point the situation will shift. Perhaps one side will gain an advantage, but for now we will keep monitoring closely. Now, regarding the situation around Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, over the past day, progress has been observed here. Russian forces advanced about 2 kilometers from the settlement of Novoekonomikne, in the area near the spoil tip, even managing to bypass the height. The spoil tip itself was heavily struck yesterday with both artillery and FAB bombs, as was Mirnohrad itself. You can even see the special markings here. 4 FABs were dropped, destroying Ukrainian garrison positions in the city. According to local Ukrainian chats, nearly 50 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in that strike. That's a fairly significant blow to the defense of a city where the Ukrainian garrison already has a difficult situation, since, as you can see on the map, the city is surrounded on almost all sides. A couple of days ago, Russian troops also entered the Stakhanov mine and secured it. I reported on this earlier. Yesterday they bypassed the spoil tip. From the north, they nearly finished taking the village of Krasnyy Lyman, which provides direct access along the tree line to the northern outskirts of Mirnohrad. The only area without progress so far is the southern side. Everything remains static there, but that's not so important. The key point is that the Ukrainian position in this area is noticeably deteriorating. As for another city, Rodinsk, unfortunately, I must report that Russian forces are bogged down there. They failed to seize the city in a sudden strike. Now the main Russian forces are focused on stabilizing the situation further north in the Dobropillya sector, so they cannot currently throw all their strength into capturing the city. So for the past day, there has been no progress there. Regarding Pokrovsk, also no news, calm and quiet. If we move to the situation in southern Donetsk region, yesterday I told you that footage emerged suggesting Ukrainian forces retook the village of Andriivka-Klevtseva. However, even Ukrainian maps, and today we are using a Ukrainian map, do not color the village as under their control. Instead, they put it in the grey zone, although they marked Ukrainian flags in the spots shown on video. Why did they not mark it as under control? Because the footage is suspicious, I'll explain. When Russian fighters filmed with flags, the grass was all burned out after battles. But when the Ukrainians posted their video with flags supposedly showing the village recaptured, the grass was green, even though only 2 days had passed. Did they manage to plant and grow new grass in 2 days? Unlikely, so most likely they filmed it earlier before Russian troops kicked them out, and then later published it saying, "Look, we retook the village." Even Ukrainian cartographers treat this claim with suspicion, not marking the village as under Ukrainian control. This is likely what's called an information can, when footage is recorded in advance and then released later at a convenient time. Finally, let's discuss the Siversk sector. Here, Russian forces took control of Serebryanka, raising flags in 5 locations in the village. According to reports from the ground, our troops also advanced slightly west of Serebryanka toward Dronivka. What will this lead to in the end? I explained in detail yesterday. First, it will create a blockade of Siversk from the north. Second, it will lead to the blockade of the Kremina forest. In my opinion, the second is even more important than the first. And regarding Kolodyazy on the Lyman sector, so far there has been no objective control footage, even though 2 days have passed since the announcement that the village is under Russian control. So far, since there is no objective footage, we should treat this information with caution. Still, I will clarify that Russian troops are definitely present there, but whether they have full control over the settlement remains unclear. However, judging by Ukrainian chats, panic is beginning to spread, and frankly, they have reasons for it, since the front is steadily approaching Lyman. Well, that's all for today regarding the frontline situation. We will be closely monitoring developments, especially the visit of Zelensky and the Europeans, because, without exaggeration, this is where everything is being decided right now. If Zelensky and the Europeans were simply to say, yes, we agree to the terms that were proposed, then in a couple of weeks the war would be over. But I fear that Zelensky will not accept these conditions, which means the war will continue for at least another year. Still, we will be watching this situation carefully. The concessions Russia agreed to, according to U.S. Special Envoy Witkoff, lie in the fact that it will not seize the entire territory of Ukraine. Commenting on this would only spoil things. However, Zelensky, at a press conference in Brussels, spoke out against the Trump-Putin plan. He said a ceasefire must be established and that work on a final agreement should begin quickly. Zelensky rejected the handover of Donetsk region, repeating once again that the constitution makes it impossible to surrender territory or to trade land. According to him, the line of contact would be the best place for negotiations. Clearly, no one will agree to this. Neither Putin nor Trump will go to the front line to conduct talks there. An absurd suggestion meant more for show. Trump reposted a call for Ukraine to concede territory. It was also reported that Trump refused to hold a joint meeting with European leaders and will meet Zelensky one-on-one, Bild writes. According to government sources, Trump will first receive only Zelensky on Monday, and only afterward will the senior European politicians accompanying him join in. The agenda includes a working dinner and extended discussions lasting several hours. Sources suggest 3 reasons why an entire European support group is flying with Zelensky to Washington. First, the obvious one. They intend to apply collective pressure on Trump, or to buy him off with promises, convincing him to prolong the war, change his stance and demands, and threaten Russia with sanctions. Essentially, to push him toward the Biden path. Second, bargaining. The globalist Europeans want to secure benefits for themselves during the division of the spoils: money, resources, prestige. Third, insecurity. The globalists no longer fully trust Zelensky. They fear he might either ruin everything again or, conversely, strike a deal with Trump. We'll see. On Bankova Street, the presidential office in Kiev, they still don't know how to react to the results of the Alaska summit, where Trump essentially handed Ukraine over to Putin, the resident Telegram channel reports. Andriy Yermak tried to secure a firm joint response from European partners, but Scholz and Macron convinced Zelensky to conduct constructive dialogue with Trump. According to Axios and CNN, Trump, after talks with Putin, proposed holding a joint summit on August 22nd with European leaders and Zelensky. The organization of this meeting will begin if the August 18th talks between Zelensky and Trump in Washington conclude successfully, CNN sources specified. The presence of a whole delegation of European leaders is not a very good signal for Ukraine, since most EU leaders now want to solve their own problems rather than help Kiev. Zelensky has already been advised not to resort to emotional diplomacy, and during the Washington meeting, he will have very limited time to influence the US president. Negotiating positions are once again polar opposites, which means today will bring tough talks and possibly even a US exit from the conflict in Ukraine. Zelensky increasingly demonstrates that what interests him is not peace, but personal power. He refuses to hold elections, citing martial law. He sabotages negotiations, hiding behind constitutional obstacles. But in reality, it all boils down to one thing: keeping his chair. Meanwhile, the country is sinking. Cities are in ruins. Millions have become refugees. But Bankova views all of this as a resource to maintain control. As long as the war continues, everything can be justified: closed media, no elections, repression of dissent. Zelensky deliberately prolongs the confrontation because he knows that peace would automatically raise the issue of new elections and a change of power. And that is something he cannot allow, which is why any reasonable proposals for possible agreements are rejected and branded as betrayal. The paradox is that the majority of Ukrainians already favor negotiations, exhausted by mobilization and poverty. They want at least a halt to the fighting, but their voice is essentially ignored. Zelensky has clung to power and is willing to hold on to it at the cost of thousands of new tragedies. Thus, the war is no longer a struggle for the country, but a struggle for Zelensky's presidency. This is no longer state policy, but Zelensky's personal project, and the longer it continues, the more costly it becomes for Ukraine. Today it will become clear which path Ukraine will take, though Kiev has already announced its rejection of the Trump-Putin plan. According to Western media, the Alaska summit was a verdict for Ukraine. Trump gave Putin the opportunity to continue his offensive in Donbass. And while fighting continues, they are implementing the agreements on division. The outcome has been a shift in position regarding a temporary ceasefire. and for this, Zelensky is being summoned to Washington. There he will be ordered to accept new terms under the threat of all aid and support being cut off. This in itself speaks volumes about the stance of the partners, as reported by the Telegram channel Secret Chancellery. The New York Times emphasizes an important point. European allies of Kiev, who had consistently demanded a ceasefire as a precondition for negotiations, have now in public statements effectively dropped that wording. This may not necessarily indicate a change in position, but rather tactical caution, a desire not to openly clash with Donald Trump, who is pushing the idea of an immediate direct peace agreement without an interim ceasefire. In his rhetoric, Zelensky has also tried to balance. On the one hand, he stresses that the country needs not just another pause between Russian offensives, but a lasting and genuine peace. On the other hand, he openly states the need to halt strikes on infrastructure, which essentially means preserving the priority of a ceasefire. This double message seems to be an attempt to satisfy his allies' demands while not aggravating Washington, which is clearly shifting the framework of the discussion. The situation reflects a fundamental dilemma. A ceasefire under current conditions could lock in new demarcation lines favorable to Moscow, while rejecting it risks a prolonged war. The Europeans appear forced to maneuver between these risks, considering that Trump, in his political logic, sees no value in a pause and insists on a deal at any cost. Thus, the core of the problem lies in the incompatibility of two approaches: the tactical one, a ceasefire as a step toward negotiations, and the strategic one, a deal as the final outcome without transitional phases. Zelensky is trying to balance between these models, but the longer this discrepancy persists, the greater the risk that Kiev itself will come under pressure, forced to choose between concessions and diplomatic isolation.